and I've had the privilege to be friends with. So this morning, we're going to talk about and that came from some time spending with God, what's on his mind? What does he want to speak to you guys about? And he brought a lot of questions up to me, reminded me of a lot of questions people are asking, specifically in this moment in time. We've had some very unique situations happen recently. Have you noticed? I know. And as we're getting through those things, people are asking, what does it look like to go back to work, back with people again, back to restaurants? Let me know if I need to adjust anything on the mic. Which I've heard you guys are really good at, so.
Do you want to check it? Which one are we? Oh. All right, we're going to switch your mic, Erica. This one will work way better. I don't know what's going on. I'll let you do it. Okay, you want to hold this?
Mm-hmm. Good thing we've been friends for a while, right? She's about to
That'll be his excuse when he yells. Okay, try to see.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. So that's what's fun. It doesn't matter if things go perfect, right? We're about to talk about preparing to love, and it's not going to go perfect when you do that, right? That's all right. So, as I mentioned, we're in a very unique point in time where we finally get to start hanging out with more people. I shook some hands today. That was refreshing. I saw this funny video, someone joking about when's the last hug you had? Those kinds of things. So we're starting to ask questions about what does it look like to go back to doing those things, back to normal. And a lot of people are discussing things like vaccines and how long we wear masks and all those kinds of things. But I want to set those things aside. Because when it comes down to it, who are we? We are Christ followers. That should be our focus. That should be how we go about the world. That should be our primary identity. Not this political party, or I'm a part of this opinion group, or, this versus this. Packers, I love them, but they shouldn't be my identity. We are Christ followers. So what does it look like to go back to spend time with people and look like Christ and follow Christ. So we're going to take a look at a verse that I feel like clarifies some of that for us. John chapter 13, verse 35. It gives some clarity in what it should look like as we go out. It says, "By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." So what should it look like? It should look like loving people, preparing to go back out, preparing to go to restaurants, spending time with people. It should look like love. As we venture out again, there's one thing we know for sure. All these things people are debating over here, opinions, but we know we are called to love, especially during this time when picking sides, debating feels so natural. We need to remember we're called to love. We serve a God who's literally love itself. This is our inheritance, to be sons and daughters of love. How do we prepare to go out as sons and daughters of a loving King? We prepare to love. Being a loving people is so important that when the disciples get some time with Jesus, they ask him, "What is the greatest commandment?" Jesus responds in Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 and 39. He says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." In this verse, Jesus is emphasizing love as being the foremost way to be living with people. This means on a scale of 1 to 10, love is the 10. So as we prepare to go out, we need to prepare ourselves to love. Not just love other Christians, not just those that think like us, but everyone. I titled this message, "Preparing to Wage Love, Part 2, because we're going to discuss today something that goes really well with what Anna Marie shared a few months ago. She shared how God's love is different, him sending Jesus to die on the cross for us. That was such a different picture of love. His love looked different, and so should ours. So as we prepare for what's next, let's be people prepared to love. Let's be prepared to set aside differences. Let's be gracious, giving. Let's be people known in our workplace, in our neighborhood, people that are known for their love and know how to love well. What if the Refuge Church, what if it was known in some prairie as a church that, man, the Refuge, they know how to love their city, their neighborhood so well? What if that was the reputation? So that sounds all great and nice and fluffy, right? Just love. What does that look like? What does it look like to prepare to love? We're going to start getting a little practical here. I'm a pretty practical person. So preparing to love looks like, my point 1, preparing to wage love looks like allowing yourself to be continuously loved by God. Have you ever heard that saying, you can't truly love until you love yourself first? That hits it on the head here. Or there's a lot of little sayings about, self-care, self-love. Let's take a look at 1 John chapter 4, verse 19. I think this one won't be on the slide. We love because he first loved us. When we accepted Jesus into our lives, when we allowed him into our hearts and our minds, we accepted love. We accepted being loved. We said, here I am, an imperfect person, accepting that God loves me so much that he sacrificed his son for me. And that changed us. It changed us from being a people who feel like we have to earn love to being a people that are empowered to love. And we get to share that same love with those around us. So how do we prepare to love? It looks like a version of self-love, but it's actually just letting God love us. We don't have to earn it. We just need to let it happen. We need to open our hearts. But let's be for real for a moment. Do we always feel loved? Do you just go about every day like, man, I feel so loved today? Definitely not. It's okay. I don't. I have days, man, where I'm like, man, so I have some perfectionist tendencies, and so there's days where I'll be like, man, I just messed that up. Oof, messed this up. Oh, I said that wrong. But that's okay, because God's love, receiving God's love, was never a one-time deal. In Lamentations chapter 3, verses 22 through 23, it says, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. We can go to God every day, every moment, and let him fill us with his love. He's never going to tell us, oof, you reached your love quotient today, sorry, come back later. He's never going to say that. He's going to say, error, sorry. He wants us. In fact, he's a father that wants us to keep coming back to him. So preparing to love looks like receiving love. That can look like prioritizing time with God, maybe taking some time to pray and meditate on God's love, letting your heart and mind be renewed in the truth. Take a drink for a moment. So there was a specific moment when I was preparing for this message that stood out to me, when God was just showing me about my own value. Speaking of motorcycle driving, anybody else pretty adventurous in the room? Anybody skydived? Bungee jumped? No? Hang glide? Yeah, that's on my bucket list. Soon. So, I'm a very adventurous person. I somehow convinced my mom to let me bungee jump at 14. I have no idea how I got her to agree to that. I skydived at 19. I kind of have a tradition with my birthdays. That's why I know what age I did these things. And there was one day when I was planning my next adventure. And I'm like just thinking about it. What do I want to do? Blah, blah, blah. Probably thinking about hang gliding. And had a moment where God was like, the adventurousness is awesome. That's how I created you to be. But the way you're going about it, you're missing it. You're not valuing your life. So the way that I was going about planning these adventures, I wasn't really caring about the outcome. I was doing it just for that thrill-seeking part. I wasn't thinking about, oh, well, you could get hurt doing this. Or I was always thinking about also Anna Marie knows I'm a friend recruiter, so I'm going to recruit my friends into this too. And I'll be like, hey, you want to go do this thing with me? And I was planning these things, but I wasn't doing it in a way that valued my own life. I wasn't doing it in a way that valued my own body. And so I just had this moment where God was like, hey, this is good. I made you adventurous. That's awesome. But you need to plan and think in a way that values your life more. So for me, preparing to love looked like letting God speak to me about my own value. To speak more into the value of not just my life, but my body. Are there any mindsets that you guys are carrying about your worth? Because you are worthy. You are loved. God values your body and your life. So preparing to love looks like letting God penetrate those places in us that we typically ignore. It's in some of those little things. I wasn't expecting a moment where God was going to talk to me about that. He just brought it up, and I just continued that conversation with him. So preparing to love, point 2, looks like being ready to drive out fear. I wish I could say we just let God love us, and voila, we love perfectly. But that's not how it works, right? The truth is, love can be a little tricky. Sometimes it can feel a little complicated. Have you ever had those moments when you're talking with someone and you don't expect it to go deep, but all of a sudden it does? And they're just telling you something really, really important to them. And you're like, whew, oh, okay. Interesting. You're like, God, what do I do with that? Wow. Because it can be tricky, right? Knowing what to say, what to do in those moments. Let's take a look at 1 John chapter 4, verse 18. It says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. What I like about this verse so much is it's so straightforward. There are certain verses that it's like what does that mean? There's times Jesus is replying and he's doing that thing where he rewords it to them, their question to them. You're like, wait, did you actually answer that? But this one is so straightforward. It says, love looks like driving out fear. So as we're in those moments when we don't know what to do, when we're caught off guard, this is saying our interactions with people should look like driving their fear. So how do we drive out people's fear? Well, let's start with naming some fears. Can anyone name a fear they can think of? Feel free to say it out loud.
Over your job, your house.
Yeah. Provision? Yeah. Lack of provision.
Your better half.
Health, is that what you said? Yeah. It can cause anxiety, worry, disappointment. There's so many different types of fears. As Christ followers, we are called to a love that drives out people's worry, drives out their anxiety, helps them through their disappointment. So preparing to love, to wage love, looks like driving out that fear. And point 3 is it also looks like preparing to wage love also looks like being intentional and considering the circumstances. To get even more practical, let's look at another verse. I know you guys, some of it you'll be able to say out loud. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8 says, Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrong. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. I feel like we go to this verse a lot because it's such a practical description of what love looks like. It's actually describing what it looks like to drive out fear. It looks like being patient when someone is wrestling with a decision. It looks like being kind even when someone doesn't deserve it. It looks like taking the humble approach instead of posting opinions on Facebook or whatever. It looks like honoring and seeking what's best for everyone involved. That verse, I feel like it's so long, that set of verses, descriptions of love, because love can truly look like so many things. And that's why it requires being intentional and considering the circumstances. Because what love looks like to love one person can look totally different to love the other person. It could be on the surface the same situation, but each person needs different things. God personally loves you and designs you in a certain way. And so he does the same for other people. So as we love other people, we have to be intentional. We need to rely on God's wisdom in each situation. There are two times that came to mind while I was preparing today, where God really showed me what it looked like to love and just how situational it is. So I come from a family of 6. I have, there's 4 siblings, 1 brother, 2 sisters. We grew up in the middle of a lot of types of brokenness happening. Parents arguing a lot, all the time. For my dad's job, we had to move around. So not only was there arguing all the time, but we also didn't have a stable community because we were moving a lot. And from that, each of my siblings, including me, our road to healing from those experiences, from the way that we grew up, has looked different. And I feel like God was having me reflect on this, how there's two specific situations I have two sisters, like I mentioned, and there's two situations that came up with them. And loving them looked so different. So my first sister, there was a period of time where she started, I should say there's an age gap between us, between me, the oldest, and the rest of the three. And so I was in a place in Madison where I was starting my career, that kind of stuff. And my parents were going through a divorce. And I would go back home to Reedsburg, Wisconsin, and I'd visit on holidays and come visit once a month, go on weekends, that kind of thing. And as I would go back, this one sister, the next oldest, she would disappear periodically for about 2 years or so. And so we knew something wasn't quite right, but like I said, to be honest, we were all dealing with our own brokenness, and so we honestly didn't really talk about it or say that much about it. Like I said, she kind of just started coming and going a lot. You never knew when she was going to show up for a holiday. And one day, I'm in Madison, and I get a call from my mom. And she's like, "Hey, so you know how your sister's been acting a little weird recently?" And I said, "Yeah." "Well, I'm in the hospital now in Madison, and she just admitted that she's addicted to drugs." And I'm like, once again, what? No idea. We had no idea. I'm like, okay. So I'm like, okay, God, what do I do about this? And, I'm talking to my mom, and she was like, "Hey, I'm at the hospital. I convinced her to, check herself in. Will you meet me there?" Okay, God, what do I do? Could have just ignored it, like all the other times we had ignored, she just disappeared. I'm like, no. So I showed up at the hospital. And she just starts confessing all these things that she'd been doing the last couple years. She was describing all these situations. We had no idea. We thought she was in, believe it or not, we thought she was in Bible school for college, for a semester. And it's actually the time that she got even more seriously involved in drugs. And so she starts just confessing this stuff to us. And I'm like, whew, wow. Okay, God, what do I do? So in that moment, love looked like just extending grace. Saying, okay, this is your truth. I don't know if you guys are familiar with anyone that's in the recovery process, but it tends to be a long journey, tends to be a complicated journey. And so loving her looked like supporting her through multiple rehab stints, being patient and patient. The first time it didn't work, the second time it didn't work. It looked like being a part of things like AA style groups on a family nights, family days. Look like honoring that process, even though, I mean, to be honest, the idea of sitting in a room sharing my junk is not comfortable. But love looked like honoring that process. There was one moment when my sister and I, as things start coming, a few months later, start coming more and more out to what she had been up to the last couple years. She ended up sharing with me one day that, so I had an old injury, once again, reckless adventurousness, old injury, and I had put some hydrocodone pills in a drawer and forgot about them. And she shared with me one day that she had stolen them from me to get high because she had ran out of her current fixes, and so she just started rummaging through drawers and ended up in mine. And so she shared with me one day that she stole those pills from me. But love looks like no record of wrong. So I forgived her. And in that moment, I said, okay, I'm going to forgive you. I wish I could just say that, she has a fairy tale ending right now. But like I said, if you know anyone that struggles with addiction, it tends to be a long, hard journey. It doesn't have to be, but it tends to be. And so loving her looks like perseverance, continuously going to God and asking, okay, how do I love this sister now? This is happening now. How do I love her? Love always perseveres. So, my second sister, very different personality. She's the youngest. She's actually the one sibling that I thought I wouldn't have to worry about. She, was the good student on student council, all those kinds of things. And so she was doing well. We're all wrestling with all kinds of brokenness, and she's wrestling with some too. But like I said, things are looking good for her. She graduated college. She was thinking about her master's, bam, 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 like, oh, awesome, God, like, finally one that feels a little easier. And then one day, just like any other day, she starts having some anxiety issues, which apparently she had had them in the past. But they start getting to the point where she can't hide them from us anymore. So she ends up sharing with me, my mom, some other family members, hey, like, I've been struggling with anxiety for a while, but now it's getting to the point where I'm having like heart palpitations. I don't know if you guys have ever had those, but like where your body physically starts responding. And so loving her looked like, first it started looking like having conversations, trying to understand what's going on with her. It looked like being patient and hopeful as she's sharing these things. Encouraging her in different ways to get help. Different strategies. Like I said, I'm practical, so I'm like, oh, well, have you tried this? Or have you tried this? And those kinds of things. But there's a point in which she was starting to go and get help and those kinds of things. But then she started neglecting herself. And I started getting worried for her. My mom started getting worried for her. She ended up, like I said, at this point, she was thinking about masters, and she had an internship, perfect internship for what she was thinking about doing for her career, and the anxiety attacks started getting so bad that she had to quit that internship. She started really wrestling with relationships in her life, and then she'd say, oh, I'm going to go to therapy, blah, blah, blah. A few months later, I'd have a conversation with her. Oh, I stopped therapy. Started having multiple conversations where she'd be starting a new med one week. The next week, she's taking herself off of them. And I start to worry. I'm like, okay, how do I handle this, God? How do I love her through this? And there was a point, like I said, this was over a few months, and it was starting to get increasingly worse. And she had so much potential. And I started getting really, really worried that she would go down the route that my other sister went down. And like I said, as I was asking God, okay, what do I do here? I felt like God was like, hey, you need to share some truth with her. But I was so scared. I don't know how you guys deal with when God tells you to do something, and it's really, really hard. But for me, it usually looks like some really, really restless sleep. I can get so when I go to bed at night, I'm one of those people that their mind just keeps going. Asked my husband last night, it was going. And I was thinking about, oh, what would I say? Well, how is she going to respond? Blah, 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 blah. And I felt like God was saying, hey, you just need to trust me. God, love looks like always trusting. So I'm like, okay, I don't know how to do this. Really, really scared she's not going to respond well, but I'm going to try. So I'm going to admit it was a messy process. We had several different type of conversations, texts, multiple texts, conversations, more conversations. We had to really wrestle through communicating well, understanding one another well. But guess what? She doesn't hate me. Whew. Remember the moment when you're trying to tell someone, you just feel like, man, they're never going to talk to me. What if they just completely stop relationship with me? What will I do? But the truth is, it made our connection deeper. Having that conversation, working through the messiness of what love looked like, actually made our connection deeper. Now we openly talk about those conversations we had. Now we have a deeper connection, deeper trust with one another, that we can be vulnerable, that we can say the hard things. So for both of those situations, loving my sisters looked so different. It was very difficult for me at that time. I had moments of heartbreak, sadness, especially as, it's hard enough sometimes just to figure out what your own life looks like, let alone how to deal with all these other things that are coming up, right? But that's where going to God over and over again each moment is so important. That first point of letting God love you over and over again. I'm so thankful that in those moments, I knew that I could go to him. I knew I could run to God in my sadness, in my heartbreak, in my fear. And he would give me the strength I needed to love. He didn't just love me, but he empowered me, helped me through loving other people. So I want to encourage you to take another look at that 1 Corinthians verse. That description of love. And as we prepare to go out, let's be intentional. Let's walk out each description there. As we go out with people, remember, in times when we're struggling, it's okay to go back to him and say, hey, man, God, I don't know what to do. It's okay. The truth is, he already knows we don't know what to do. So, hiding from that is pretty silly. But we need to remember to go back to him, receive love. Let him renew our minds in what we need. And then he also will empower us, give us the strength to love others. Let God show his love to you. And that will be our fuel to love others. So we let him love us. And that empowers us to drive out fear. And driving out fear can look situational. It looks intentional. And we go back to him when we need to. So as we go out, as we're looking at what's next, as we're preparing to have cookouts, barbecues, baseball games, all these different things, let's be ready and prepared to love. So I'm just going to pray in closing here. God, I just thank you for demonstrating love to us through Jesus. I just thank you that you went first, that you showed us what love looks like first. God, I pray for anyone that's struggling with their worth today. Speak to our worthiness, God. Thank you that we are worthy. Pray that you help us value our own lives and our own bodies more. Show us how you see us, how you see our worthiness, how you see our value. Reveal to us places that we need to let you love us more in. I pray that you help us in those moments when we're caught off guard, when we don't know what to say, we don't know what to do. Remind us to come to you. Remind us to go back and ask you what we should do. Help us to remember to be intentional. Help us to not assume what someone needs. Remind us that love looks differently. Yeah, and I just pray that you fuel us in how to love. Show us how to love well, God. In your name, Jesus, amen.